As we think through what this means for oil in particular, what should we be paying attention to? I think up in the run-up to all of this, there was a lot of concern over what might happen to the Strait of Hormuz, what it would mean if that were to be constricted, if oil couldn't get out. As you look at that map, the map function on the Bloomberg terminal today, and see those 200-plus tankers there in the region, kind of wondering, as the heads of those ships wondering as we are, what happens next, what does this mean for the oil market?
There's still open questions. So in the last 12 hours, I think we had four key questions when it comes to Iran, and I think 3 of them has been settled, and we'll have a partial answer to the 4th. The first question was, will the US and Israel attack Iran? And yes, they have. Second question was, will the Iranian government survive the attack? And the answer is yes, they have survived. The third question is, will the Iranian retaliation be significant or symbolic, like previous wars? And actually they went for symbolic. And the last question is, what will Iran retaliate against? Will it restrict itself to US bases in Israel, or will it expand that to all facilities in the region? And so far, it has attacked US bases in the region, across the region, and Israel, but you cannot rule out attacks against all facilities or the Strait of Hormuz in the coming hours or days.
Ziad, I also want to ask you about sanctions. The Iranian economy has long been suffering under U.S. and international sanctions. We had the snapback E3 sanctions earlier this year. What is the state of Iran's economy, and what is the impact of a prolonged conflict like this going to do on an economy that is already under dire straits?
Well, there are two things here, I think. The first thing is, when it comes to the Iran economy, its state is already dire, and that has led to protests in late December and January this year. But this war is different. This war is not about the economy. This is, for the Iranian leadership, this is existential, and it's about survival. And it's about more military than economic. If they can survive the next few months, it's a question of not whether the economy is going to be able to survive this in terms of inflation, in terms of the currency, but whether they can survive the military attack and the counterattacks they're going to launch against the US and Israel and their allies in the region. That's the key question for Iran, more than the economy, in the coming days and weeks, I think.
Ziad, for those who don't know, how integral is Iran to the global oil market? We had those headlines this morning from a delegate, an OPEC Plus delegate, indicating that maybe production could be increased as a result of what's happened here overnight. When we look at the market holistically, how integral, how important is Iran to oil production globally?
Iran is significant, but it's not irreplaceable. So Iran produces about 5% of the global oil supplies, put to the world. But that's not the key issue. The key issue is the wider region. Once you just expand the war beyond Iran, you need to start thinking about Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Kuwait and the UAE and Qatar. We're talking about 1/3 of global oil supplies. If you think about one particular waterway, which is the Strait of Hormuz, that basically 20% of global oil flows goes through that. And that is very difficult to replace. Yes, OPEC Plus may decide to increase the quotas, but if these additional quotas are coming from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iraq, and they cannot exit the Strait of Hormuz to the rest of the world, they may not be effective in hedging the losses from this war.
We've talked a lot about what the impact of actual physical strikes could be, but what is the psychological impact on production here? We've already seen some oil fields shutting down preemptively. Could that have just as big of an impact, as producers don't want to send their ships through that strait at the moment? They're shutting down, pulling their personnel out of harm's way. How big of an impact could that have?
I think the physical sort of threats are more important than the psychological threat. Let's remember, this is not the first war in the Middle East in the last 2.5 years.
This is a good point. This is a good point.
The Middle East has been in an almost continuous state of war with unprecedented geopolitical escalation. Things that we did not imagine could have happened have already happened. And yet oil prices today, on Friday they closed at $71 per barrel. On the 6th of October, 2023, they were $85 per barrel. So they're lower than the starting point. So I think on the psychology, I think markets are sort of getting used to the geopolitical escalation in the Middle East. The key question here is whether we're going to get physical disruption. And this is another test. It's probably the most serious test in the last 2.5 years.